Welcome back. Let's go back to our topic of revising students' compositions. We have here with us today Dr. Andrea Peña-Florida and Ms. Jo Mariano. Now, we'd like to ask you, how do you find the task of correcting your students' compositions?
Well, actually, I find correcting my students' composition overwhelming. Yeah.
Overwhelming. And Dr.
Well, in my case, correcting my students' composition is really difficult. Very difficult.
Very difficult.
Yes.
Why is this so?
You see, I've formed the habit of correcting errors in grammar and mechanics at the same time. After checking each composition, I get overwhelmed with all the red marks I made. The worst thing is I can't get into the content of my students' composition anymore. And I realize that I'm doing the revision work myself. Yeah.
Let's see. And Dr. Andy, in your case?
Well, in my first few years of teaching, I practically corrected all my students' errors in grammar, as well as in organization, content, and mechanics. Imagine how really difficult it was correcting 150 papers in one sitting.
Oh, goodness.
No, really, I found that quite difficult. But you should have seen how I corrected their papers. You should have seen how I bled my students' papers to death.
Oh, dear. But there has to be a better way of doing this. What might you suggest? Is there an alternative method, Jo?
Yeah, I think I need to change my way of correcting my students' composition.
Yeah. What might you suggest, Dr. Andy?
That's right. In my case, I really don't want to splash red ink all over my students' compositions.
Okay. We're thinking of another technique the teachers might use. What would you suggest?
Okay, let me see. How do I correct my students' compositions? First, I skim through all the papers. Then I classify them as follows. Very good for all those papers that are well written. Good for those with errors, but these errors don't impede communication. Fair for those that have many grammatical errors but are still comprehensible. And poor for those that are really incomprehensible.
Right.
Then, the next step I do is to read all the papers more carefully this time, while at the same time writing marginal comments. You see, I've learned not to write comments such as improve, too broad, specify, and the like, because they don't mean anything to our students.
Too ambiguous.
Instead, yes, I write more explicit directions like, or more explicit comments like, your use of a quotation to introduce your composition is very good. But who wrote it? You see, you don't just have to say or give the quotation. You have to give the source too. Okay.
That's right.
Or describe your mother. Right? Like the way you describe your sister, something to that effect.
Yes.
Or give a more vivid word for nice, or walk, or sad. Now you see, there are other alternative forms of assessing students' papers.
And what are these, Dr. Andy?
Yes. One is peer feedback. I pair off my students and then ask them to evaluate each other's work. There are, of course, other alternative forms of assessment, such as protocol analysis, journal writing,
Yes.
okay, portfolio assessment, and learning logs.
Learning logs. That all sounds very interesting. So thank you very much, Dr. Andy and Jo, for joining us today. And I hope their suggestions were very helpful to you.
You're most welcome.
Now, let me ask you this question. Do you also have the same habit of correcting errors in grammar and mechanics more than errors in content? Indeed, we need self-discipline and forbearance in responding to our students' compositions. Refraining from correcting these errors is not easy, but we must respond to the content of our students' work. First, for this is the major concern of the writer. Only after doing this should we take a look at the surface features of the language used, such as grammar, spelling, mechanics, and others. Let's go back to the question, how do you conduct your revision sessions with your students? But before you answer this question, let's visit a classroom where you will see the students writing their formal themes.
Class, it's almost time. Please pass your compositions now. Yes, Ryan.
Mom, we have not yet finished.
Yes. Mom, can I pass my composition later?
Mom, me too.
Okay, you may pass your papers later.
Do you correct errors in the same manner? Notice that the teacher focused on errors in grammar and mechanics more than on content. This is called the direct correction technique. She didn't give her students a chance to think of the words themselves. Let's look at the next scenario.
Class, I've already checked your compositions. What I want you to do now is to rewrite your compositions on the next page of your formal theme paper. Lilia, can you please come in front and help me distribute these papers?
It's my pleasure, ma'am.
Okay. Please note my corrections when you rewrite your work. Do you understand, class?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh my! This does not look like my composition anymore. It's full of red marks, full of corrections. I feel awful about this.
My composition looks the same as yours, Jake, full of red marks. It's no longer my composition. My original ideas are no longer here.
How would you have felt if you were one of the students? Would you have felt the same way too? I guess you would have. We have just seen a typical problem in revising compositions. Who did the revision? You're right, the teacher did the revision. And what did she focus on? She focused on grammaticality and not on substance or content. Before I take you to another classroom scenario, let's have a short break. Stay tuned.